Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Brenneman Blueprint. Awesome to have you guys all here today. I appreciate everyone who supported the podcast. I just noticed a big uptick in reviews and just in the numbers the last few months. And then really over the last, let's say, call it 18 months, the podcast has grown a lot. And so I want to do a few of these kind of callback episodes to episodes that came out really early that if you're a new listener, you probably would have missed unless you read every possible episode that came out, carefully on what was out there. I want to go back and highlight another episode that came out really early. Actually, the 7th episode I did was with Gabe Horstick. And Gabe's someone that I admire really a lot. He's a multifamily investor in the Chicagoland area. He started out just buying a 3-unit in the Lincoln Park neighborhood, and now he's doing new construction development deals with, $20-30 million. So exciting to see everything that the career trajectory so far for Gabe. He was a lender when I met him and was just kind of thinking about getting going more actively, doing more than just having the couple 3 units he had at the time. So really proud of Gabe. And one thing that I really admire about Gabe is he's really helped. I know quite a few people with mentorship, other people who want to get going in real estate. And so on this episode, Gabe's been on a couple times before, but on this very first one we did, I had asked him really every question I could think of. So I didn't leave a lot of gas in the tank on new questions for some of the later episodes. I dumped it all in on this first one, and he had really, really a lot of good advice for people starting out in real estate investing. So for new investors and for young people. So especially if that's you, that this is definitely worth a listen from cover to cover, end to end, whatever you want to start to end to end, you'd miss it all. Start, from start to finish. And, and even if that's not you, there's just a lot of really good in general business and career advice in this. But, since it came out so early, episode 7, this would have came out in like 2021. So just kind of as we, sit here today, all the advice is still very applicable, and maybe more so now that things got a little tougher. When we recorded this, everything had been, up for 10 years, and we were in the thick of like the peak pricing on everything in the real estate universe. So either way, so this was a great episode, but since it came out so early, want to highlight it and put it out there again. So again, thanks for everyone who's really helped grow the podcast. If you've told anybody about it or left a review, that really means a lot to me. It's been exciting to see how much it's grown. I wouldn't be replaying an episode if the audience size was the same or anything, but I think we've just had a lot of people, especially around episode somewhere in like the late 30s in terms of the numbers, like episode 40, and then episode 50, just kind of every month I've noticed this where this has been growing steadily. And so I think probably a lot of people that would see this episode come out now, maybe they scroll back to episode 7, but couldn't tell maybe from the title if this was going to be for them or applicable or old news. And so it's definitely not, and want to reshare it with everybody. So hope you enjoy. Thanks.
Listen, everybody, we all know that real estate is the most proven way to build wealth. But why isn't everyone wealthy from real estate then? It's hard to know where to start, and most of the education out there is just complete trash, and you end up investing your money on a series of courses instead of in real estate. That's not how this podcast works. We give you the blueprint to successful real estate investing and bring on guests actually willing to share their secrets. I started my real estate investing journey as a freshman in college when I bought my first duplex and have been in the trenches doing deals ever since. And today, I now own hundreds of millions of dollars of investment property. On this podcast, you will learn what you actually need to know to be a successful active or passive real estate investor. And we'll offer our takes on what's happening today so you can navigate this market and build wealth. I'm Drew Brenneman, and this is the Brenneman Blueprint.
Today we have Gabe Horstick, a multifamily real estate investor and founder of Base 3 Development. I'm excited to bring him on. Gabe has either acquired, redeveloped, or developed 130 million of multifamily property across 50 different assets. And he formerly was a banker at Wells Fargo and made the successful transition from a lender on multifamily property to an owner of multifamily property. So, and I guess not just multifamily, we've also got some office and other deals in there too, which we'll get into. But
absolutely.
So excited to have you on. Thanks for being on, Gabe.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. So my name is Gabe Horstick. I'm founder of Base 3 Development, a Chicago-based development company. prior to Base 3 Development, I co-founded Campbell Street Asset Management, which under my leadership grew to over $100 million of assets owned and managed here mostly in the city of Chicago. And as you mentioned, prior to that, I worked in the corporate world at Wells Fargo Bank. So I've had a really interesting run, and excited about the future and happy to talk about the past.
Yeah, let's go back maybe to wherever the beginning is. So where did kind of your adventure here in real estate get started?
Well, we could go back really far. As far as when I was 12 years old, I actually wrote in my my sixth grade yearbook what I wanted to be when I was 20 years later at the age of 32. And I was one of the only people that wrote they wanted to be a real estate developer. In fact, I even said how many units I would have or what I was building with some level of detail. So I knew I wanted to do this from a very early age.
How did you even know that? Okay, I probably didn't know what a real estate developer was till I was 19. Like I didn't. It's like going to college. How do you even know to look into this?
So it's funny. I'm very close with my dad. He's someone I admire and respect and love. He was a businessman for most of his career, and he would always give me clippings from the Wall Street Journal.
Nice.
And one clipping I remember was that it was in the Wall Street Journal. There was a developer who was sitting out a market downturn, and he said it was a bad time to buy, and so he was focusing on his car collection.
Wow.
And I thought that was kind of cool. And
yeah.
And then also he had me building things as a kid. I was always playing with power tools. We built a clubhouse in our backyard, and I always liked the idea of something tangible that you could build.
Yeah. So yeah, then you said you worked initially for a developer somewhere?
Yeah. So when I was 18, starting college, I actually worked for a local home builder in the Wisconsin, Southeast Waukesha area, a guy named Gilmore Construction, Gilmore Builders. And I actually worked as a bricklayer. I was a carpenter. I was a painter. I was a landscaper. And I even, got to wax the guy's boat.
Yeah,
so I would work cleaning up job sites, and sort of funny, I actually got carpal tunnel within the first 3 months of working this job.
These are all hard jobs. The ones you mentioned, or it's like there's an easy one in there.
It was crazy. I'd be pushing a 300-pound wheelbarrow. I'd be driving, backhoes and other things. So it was really a great place though to understand the hands-on aspect of what it means to be a builder and to be in the construction business as a home builder. So that was a great experience. And then like yourself, and that's how we really connected. I went to UW-Madison where I got a degree in real estate and finance. So
nice. And then I know you got your real estate license at some point in there.
No, that's it's nice you mentioned that. That was actually my early intro into being in real estate. At 19, I got my real estate license in Wisconsin. And so while I was at UW-Madison, I actually hustled nights and weekends selling condos and houses. And I actually worked for a local developer who was my mentor and very good friend. And we're still very close friends to this day. In fact, it's great. I'm very proud to say I'm actually a mentor to his son.
Nice.
So I'm helping with their family business in Madison still to an extent.
Nice.
So
how would you find the clients then? So okay, as a teenager, that seems like it'd be hard to find clients. You're not in like a professional circle.
That's actually a great question. So I worked for this developer, and unfortunately I didn't get to sell any of his projects or properties, but I met friends that were graduating from UW-Madison and taking professional jobs in Madison.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're not talking, massive sales volume, but enough to, help pay for my first apartment in Chicago.
Yeah. But actually that's impressive that they would hire you for that, rely on you.
They didn't know anyone else.
Or they thought you knew what you were doing even at that early age.
Yeah. It was sort of a fake it till you make it moment. But actually, interesting side story is that I grew up in Wisconsin, like yourself, and we had a family farm in the Oconomowoc area. Nice. And it was a farm that my grandparents bought for my grandfather and my grandmother's retirement. And my grandmother had passed away years prior to me getting my real estate license, but I knew that this was a property that had to be sold at some point. And in around 2005, during the home building boom, I actually was able to secure what ended up being a multi-million-dollar listing for this family farm, and ultimately sold it to a local home builder who closed on the land in 2008, 2 weeks prior to the collapse of Lehman. So it was a very
Wow.
Exciting and somewhat frightening time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was really how I got in at an early age. And I recommend it to your viewers or whoever's watching this because it's really just paying a fee and taking a class, and anyone can basically do it, and there's very low barriers to entry. And even when I first, got my corporate job after school, I would be selling properties on the side just to make extra money and
Yeah.
have extra money to then invest in real estate.
Yeah.
So,
And then you're in the game. And so okay, we went to UW-Madison, then you already have your real estate license. And then your first job was the Wells Fargo one?
yes, that's correct. So it's funny. I never envisioned being a banker. I always wanted to be a real estate developer. But on good advice from some of the people I'd worked with at Madison in the development world, I was told that this would be a great way to sharpen my financial acumen and get really good exposure to commercial real estate. So I moved here in 2006, here being Chicago, and took a job as an analyst and gradually worked my way up to being a loan officer. What I enjoyed most about that bank was I made some of my best friends in that job and that corporate environment, many of which I'm still really close with to this date. And then also I had a lot of really cool clients, a lot of middle market real estate developers who were doing their own $1 to $20 million deals. And a lot of these people were impressed by my active role in starting to buy my own properties at an early age.
Yeah, I would be today, where that's really a differentiator. It makes you unique to a lot of the bankers they'd be talking to.
Yeah. Sure. Well, and so a lot of the clients actually at the bank became close friends of mine and were able to refer people and trades. So to the extent I wanted to buy my own property, I had people I could go to and say, hey, you were successful. How did you do it? Where did you start? What was your first building?
Yeah.
And that's something that now that I'm a little more senior in my career, I love doing for other young people to get them excited about getting into business.
So what would you say was one of the main things that you learned at Wells Fargo then?
Really, it was just a general understanding of how debt worked and what level of leverage could be provided and how much equity was needed, and really being a good risk manager. And that's something that I've really taken with me from my banking days, is being a good manager of risk, because as you grow a real estate portfolio, you really are a risk manager. And so I think being somewhat conservative and understanding your downside, which is something that's very commonly discussed at the bank, and understanding leverage, exposure, and what is the worst possible case, because I worked through really the worst of financial times in 08, 9, 10 when the financial downturn happened. So,
right, because I was going to ask the next thing, what exactly years were these? Because like 2007-ish.
Yeah, that's correct. So I started my banking career at Wells Fargo in 2006. And it was a great time to be at the bank. We were lending at the time. I remember we had a retail developer, and we were financing a $4 million Walgreens with $100,000 down that he could then potentially sell for $5 million.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of those properties had very little equity, very little, sponsorship, skin in the game, as we say in the business.
Right.
And lo and behold, Walgreens hit pause on their expansion, and we had land and that we had loans on with really no exit strategy. So what it also taught me too is that is you take risk as a developer or an investor in real estate, as long as you are willing to work with your creditor to solve a problem or work through something difficult and really can stand tall and figure out a problem. It's very uncommon to go through total financial hell. I mean, banks do not want to take the property. And so that's the funny thing, was my time at the bank seeing workout situations where projects didn't work out and seeing what people did and what their profile was as a borrower. And then basically being able to say, all right, that didn't work. That put them in financial straits. And actually one of the biggest takeaways that I received from my time in banking was that the people who got outside of their lane and started doing other sorts of deals were those who got the worst hurt. And specifically, I had a lot of clients that were multifamily investors throughout Chicagoland mostly. And the guys that stayed in multifamily but ventured into condominium and for sale, where you have to count on certain things happening, those were the guys that took a major hit. And the ones that survived were the guys that maintained a stable multifamily portfolio. So that was a really big takeaway from being at the bank.
So then was that more about why multifamily is great, let's say that lesson, or really more why specialize and stay in your lane?
I think it's certainly a combination of the two, but I would say that multifamily continues to be the favored investment because financing is readily available and equity is shockingly readily available.
Right.
One thing I do want to point out that we were talking about earlier is that working in a corporate environment was a great way to start my career because I was able to have income, which was important, but also I had some spare time on my hands. And so it was during that time frame that I was able to go outside of the corporate world and begin dabbling as an entrepreneur, like I said, selling properties on the sides. And, I like to joke that, well, I was buying my first property in Chicagoland and doing all the work myself while my friends were watching college football.
Yeah.
And it really, what's most exciting about real estate is you can really get out what you put in, and no one's ever going to say you can only own so much,
Right.
or you can only make so much. You really dictate your own success. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you're the only person you can look at if you have a lot of it or very little. So
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, and that's an interesting memory then, in terms of missing college football and other stuff. Because I got similar stuff where even when the Cubs were in the World Series, I was dealing with a emergency at the property owned in Madison.
Oh,
But
okay.
I don't think I saw a game of it almost.
yeah.
Because we had a shower mixer just leak into the wall.
Oh,
Remember,
geez.
across
We've had
hundreds
that
of,
happen.
yeah, that anyways, and then we were, for that deal, we're self-performing the work just because we didn't have, it was
Keep
the
it
only
lean.
property up there.
Yeah.
So that just me and my dad putting that wall back together.
That's amazing.
So,
Family business.
yeah, but anyways, that's interesting to hear. So then it was kind of your first, so you're doing stuff, let's say nights and weekends while you're working at Wells Fargo, but what specifically did you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's funny, when I moved to Chicago at the age of 21, going on 22, with the bright dream of being a real estate investor, I was constantly scouring for properties, and I didn't realize that it could be as easy to buy a big property as much as a small property. So after literally looking for about a year and almost losing hope, I stumbled across a property that was off market in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago. And a good college friend and I, a guy I actually met at Madison in class, really great guy. We're still close friends to this day. We scraped our money together and we bought this little 4-flat and did all the work ourselves and cleaned up the units, put some paint on it. And it was a very mismanaged, undervalued property. And so we bought it off market. And what I remember most was paying, a certain price for it and then getting an appraisal back that was immediately $30,000 more than what we had paid.
Wow.
So it was at that moment that I realized that just by closing on this deal, just by taking ownership, I made $30,000. And I started comparing that to the toil of having a corporate job, and the light bulb went on. I don't think the light bulb was frankly bright enough at the time, but what was interesting about that property is my friend and I actually planned on each living in one of the apartments, and we had a real basic Excel model that basically said, okay, if we buy this building for this amount of money and we put down around 20%, what will our cash flow be and what's our yield on equity? And it looked like it was around 8%, and not even thinking about vacancy and all the other intricacies of underwriting it. It said, you know what, 8% feels really good with surety, and we're getting a hard asset and we can live here. So there's actual value.
Were you underwriting appreciation or anything in here?
No, it hadn't even.
I'll tell you why I started laughing, because the same thing I did on my first deal. I say the same thing to everyone when they're like, what should I do for syndicating and this and that and all this complicated stuff? And I always say the same thing. There's so much going on. Like, just try to figure out your monthly cash flow and really be confident of that. Know your rents and your expenses. And might be all you'll be able to focus on in your first deal. Like, the price you're paying, this is complicated to value a building, or how to do everything and close it just right. So yeah, my first deal, all my math was, this seems like a good buy, and I'm making, it's a $220,000 house. I'm making $200 a month, and I can live in it, included in that. Yeah, so I guess brilliant. Worst case, I will move out eventually, and that room's probably worth like $400 or $500, and I'll make $600 a month or less, and just hold it if I overpay and screw up. So that's actually, I'm shocked kind of that's your answer, because that is the same thing I was thinking. Isn't where funny? Just otherwise you would have been looking and underwriting deals for the next 3 years.
And that's a funny point, is that another thing that stood out to me when I was evaluating buying that property was, can I live with having this money tied up indefinitely? Because real estate is inherently illiquid, and you can't control getting out of it.
Yeah.
You can really only control getting into it when you buy it. And so for that particular property, I basically made the decision that, can I live with making 8% on whatever my down payment was? And the answer was yes. Now, what was really interesting about that property that has become a recurring theme in my career and my business strategy was that we essentially bought something that was undervalued and mismanaged, that needed a little bit of work. It was a great first property because it wasn't a gut. It wasn't in court. It didn't have major issues. It was literally, let's go in and give it a nice coat of paint, put some landscaping in front, do some new pavers in back, fix the deck. But that was pretty much it. And it was interesting. Within 6 months of buying it, we reappraised the property, and it had increased by approximately 15 to 20%.
Wow.
And so at that time, we were able to take a loan. And I'm going to just use hypothetical numbers, but let's say hypothetically we bought the building for $800,000, and within 12 months it appraised for almost $1 million. We were then able to lever up, meaning increase the debt to the incrementally higher appraised value.
Right.
And what I actually find interesting as I go out and raise money and do other projects is that most people don't understand, when you have that capital event, it's actually tax-free.
Right.
So you're monetizing appreciation tax-free. And that's the key to really building wealth in real estate. And so with this particular property, which it's now about 13 years later, I actually still own it. And I kid you not, this is sort of funny, I've refinanced this property at least 6 times.
Yeah.
Tax-free every time. And that's the power of the long-term investment strategy.
Yeah.
And I say this to young people I mentor and am trying to help get their start in the business. I basically say, if you buy a property in your early 20s, you're going to blink and you're going to be an old guy like me in his late 30s. And so it's the power of compounding. I mean, that building I was referencing as my first property, when I bought it, the units were rented for $1,200 a month for a 2-bed, 1-bath, which sounds incredibly inexpensive for Lakeview, Chicago. Within 12 months, we had bumped the rents up to market of around $1,500. And since that time, I've done more extensive renovation, and I'm renting that unit for about $2,700.
Wow.
And no one knows what the future may hold. No one knows, with inflation and other, different factors at play, that maybe $2,700 today could look really cheap in 10 years, and maybe it's $3,500. But
Right.
at that time, maybe the cup of Starbucks coffee you're drinking for $3 is $7, and the average worker isn't making 50 grand; they're making 110. And that's just the big picture of inflation, and it is inevitable. And that's why I continue to be a big believer in this. So
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, on these multifamily deals, you reset your rates every year in terms of the rental rate, and some of your biggest costs are relatively fixed. Where you're locking in your debt. Typically we're using fixed rate interest.
Yeah.
I know you are too. Fixed rate loans, and so you've locked in your biggest cost. And if you have rates, everything starts running up, you're going to have a big. Obviously, your expenses increase too, your operating expenses, but that's a smaller number than your rent.
Absolutely. Well, and another thing I'd point out too is a major risk mitigant in buying property in a big city in desirable areas is that there's a really deep renter pool. And so, the building I just mentioned, it's a smaller building. Was a great starter building, but in over 70 months of ownership, I think I've only had about 3 months of vacancy.
Wow.
And so the other thing on that note is that even if rents take a hit, in a major city in a good area with a presentable building that has decent curb appeal, you will find a renter. You will get bodies in there. And actually, it was funny on that first deal, because we managed it so closely. We went so far as to find random roommates on Craigslist and put them in in a coach house to just get a bigger rent and a bigger revenue. Easy to do on your first deal, but hard to do as you scale up a business. So
we did that early on too with some like a winter lease. So like the rents are down seasonally here, let's say in the Midwest. So we on a deal where we had rented all the units at the rents we wanted to hit, and then we got stuck with like a November rental. So great. We went on Craigslist and found 3 guys, and then they rented a room for 6 months. April, they're all happy to go because it was like everyone was sort of moving to Chicago. So they were happy with this arrangement.
100%.
And then we charged full market price in May, did our refi. Same story you're talking about. So that it's funny, we're doing a lot of the same stuff.
Well, and it's fun. You have to be nimble, and you have to be creative, and you have to be willing to go through some strange situations of finding random people off the street to live together.
Yeah,
I can't believe I did that. But when I was 24, 25, and I had to make the mortgage. I
Yeah.
did what I had to do within reason. And it was sort of funny just being, creative and saying, hey, there's real value here. As a person moving to Chicago, and I can speak firsthand, I remember when I moved here, a nice apartment for a 1-bedroom was $1,300 a month. And then if you had a 2-bedroom, it was $1,500 a month, $1,600 a month.
Right.
We'll divide that by 2, and there's clearly value there. So that was an interesting pivot at that point of my career. But so yeah, I mean, it really all started with that first building, which it's sort of funny. After owning it 13 years, the city just passed an ordinance that allows me to add even another unit to it. So I'm going to make that building a 4-unit into a 5-unit, and in doing so, my rents are probably around 250% higher than when I bought it. So
Wow.
it's funny just finding more ways to add
Yeah.
value and just be creative and be nimble. But
And do you, for the cash out refinance being tax free, do you have any? How do you typically explain that to just, let's say, the average investor or person? I've got an analogy I'll give if you.
yeah, no, that's a great question. I'd like to use dollar examples. So for instance, just saying, there's a price appreciation that's often not captured when you look at just yield, or if you're looking at yield but not looking at the exit and the IRR and the equity multiple. And so I would basically just say, hey, we buy a building and we run essentially a conveyor belt where we're buying something that needs work. And let's say we pay $1 million for it, and we put 200 grand in it. And if we're doing our job well, there's at least a 15 to 20% value margin, meaning that for every $1 million of investment, we're creating a value that's worth $1.2 million. So we're adding value. And we're adding value by doing renovation and increasing rents, or we're adding value by underpaying for something and turning around management. But we're basically creating incremental value. So in my scenario of buying something for $1 million, putting $1.2 million into it, and then, for instance, getting it to appraise for $1.5 million, we can then monetize that value. And I would normally just draw out like a bar that says, this is the value, these are the amounts, and then say, well, we can monetize that value tax-free by now lending against, taking a loan out against 75 to 80% of the marginal increased value, which in that case, 80% on $1.5 million would be,
I think it's $1 million too.
I'm a smart guy. Yeah, there we go.
No, some of these, it's funny.
The
These
human calculator, everyone.
No, the incremental stuff is like that. If you were said $1.55 million, I don't know. But these round numbers, so we actually do the same math all the time.
Well, and so what's really interesting is in that scenario where if you buy a building for $1 million, you put 200 grand into it, and you get it to appraise for $1.5 million, and you can now put a loan on it for 80% of $1.5 million.
Right.
You can essentially have a property with no original equity in it.
Yeah.
And you're basically playing with the house money. You're basically using debt as your equity, and then you're able to recuperate all your equity and roll on to the next project. So that's what is, in my mind, the most exciting thing about real estate is even if you can't have that value increase day one, maybe in 5 years, the loan comes up and you revisit the property, and maybe it's not worth $1.5 million. Maybe it's worth $2 million. And now you can put a loan on it for $1.5 million to $1.6 million. And not only do you have your original principal back, but you have additional equity out beyond your costs. And so I've had multiple instances in my career where I've financed 100 to 150% of my project costs. Nice. The sooner we can do that, the better. But in the long run, when you're a long-term horizon investor, in summary, what's so interesting about increasing your debt on a property is you're able to have a tax-free capital event, which is, it's sort of funny. I have some extremely sophisticated investors and people I've worked with, and when I've given them a distribution check and said, here's your original principal returned in full, they basically said, well, what's the tax implication?
Right.
Which I said that there is none. And that's why we're in this business. It's incredibly tax efficient, and you're able to see an appreciation on a value, monetize it by increasing your loan, and basically take that capital out and redeploy it. And so it's funny, as I look at my original first early on deals, probably the first 15 or 20, I think I'm basically playing all with financing, with non-recourse agency debt, and pretty much have returned 100% of the capital. So
yeah, it's a great strategy to build your portfolio. And one, what's interesting too, I think that's different, and we should point out with, let's say, a multifamily rental property compared to, let's say, borrowing more money against your single family house or something that you own. On all these deals, to support the higher price, you've done something to increase the value by increasing the rents. So now the rents are higher, the income of the property is higher, and it can support this higher loan payment. So in a lot of instances, let's say in that first deal you're talking about had an 8% cash on cash. Then you increased the rents a lot, did a refi. Maybe then at that point, the cash on cash went back to 8, but now you've pulled out all your money. So it's a really compelling, option if that's how you want to go about building your portfolio. We're both younger guys, so this is a good option for us. And then, when a lot of older investors, they're more at a point where they refi when rates drop, but they don't want to pull out money. They're trying to pay debt down.
Yeah.
So this is a great strategy for building your portfolio, though, and really minimize taxes. Because you created the value on that first 4 unit, you refi money out, you can go buy a second deal with that money if you want, and you still own the first one. There's no tax. So yeah, that's a great explanation. And one way, what I was getting at was if you had any analogies about how to explain it. And what I've started doing to explain to let's say a non-real estate investor how it works, like you have a car. This is the analogy, right? Whether you owe money on that car or not, like just imagine you do, but you could have borrowed more and you decided, yeah, I want to borrow more now. There's no tax on that. Like you just took out a lot larger loan on your car, pay off the original loan, and that's, you just borrowed more money. Why would there be tax on that?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. The only thing that's crazy is the renter is paying the mortgage, basically.
Yeah.
So you can just have the money, and it's not like a car where it's dropping in value. These are going up in value.
Yeah.
So that's how I've explained to a few people who's like a totally foreign thing. It's and the other thing that's, if you redeploy that money that you pulled out from the loan into another investment of some sort, you can also deduct the higher interest. So you're able to, actually reduce your taxes doing this because you have a higher deduction
on all sides.
Yeah. So no, interesting. So in that first deal, how long, so you're working at Wells Fargo, you bought the first 4 unit. How long, since you bought 50 buildings, so I know there's more deals here. When was the next deal? How'd that work?
So the next deal was interesting. It was actually the same owner that sold me the first building. She had a building next door. Same thing. And I didn't know her. I actually bought the first one through a broker. So I just wrote up a purchase and sale agreement, mailed it to her. And next thing you know, I get an email back that she's interested and maybe she'd sell that one too. And what I realized it was sort of a funny way of almost playing Monopoly and acquiring 2 properties, getting operational efficiencies, and then actually ultimately being able to wrap those into a single loan with a bigger dollar amount loan. And theoretically down the road, I think there's more value in a portfolio and a package.
Were those next to each other?
Yeah, those are 2 adjacent buildings. If I'm not mistaken, I think I even tried to sell them to you at one point. So
I know.
You likely do know the assets.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I hung on. And then, as I mentioned, it's sort of funny, these same buildings, a new ordinance was introduced by the city of Chicago that allows you to add units. So I'm adding units to both of them. And when I do that, I'll be able to increase my rent by another 30%. And so the math there, I've actually done this before. So I bought these 2 buildings, and then it's funny, I bought a building in East Lakeview that was a really spectacular deal. And this one really allowed me, and this was all while I was working a corporate job.
Yeah.
I'd like to jokingly say 40 hours a week, but it was that. And I was working hard.
Banker's hours,
putting in real-time banker hours. But, I moved on, and it's funny. I found a major return in adding units to existing buildings. And so, funny story, my 3rd building I bought, and this was in 2012, so it was at year 4 of my corporate job. I actually bought a 4-unit Greystone in East Lakeview, right by Lake Michigan. And I'll just talk rough numbers because it is actually interesting to take note, and I don't want to get super into the weeds and details of the numbers, but I basically bought a 4-unit building Greystone for a little under $600,000. And what's interesting is because I was actually representing myself as the broker, it was, call it $580,000 purchase price, but I received a 2.5% commission. So I needed to, at the time, put down around 120 grand, but I had a 2% commission. So I wasn't putting down 120 grand. I was actually putting down more like 95.
Nice.
So fast forward, this building, I, borrowed some money and I updated the units, and I put in maybe another $150,000. And I subsequently actually had the building valued at $1.3 million. Wow. So I was all in on this property for around $950,000, $1 million. I'm sorry. Actually, no, I was in for around 750, and I got it appraised for $1.3 million. So basically, in equity, I had created $1.3 million less my costs, and I was able to refinance it, take 100% of my original investment out, plus another 20%. So let's say I started with 115 grand in, I put in another $150,000 rehab costs. So I had a total all in of 250. I was actually able to cash out something like $400,000.
Wow.
Now it doesn't end there. In 2015, or perhaps it was 2016, I found some obscure city record that actually said that you didn't actually buy a 4-unit, you bought a 6-unit. So I found a very intelligent architect who was able to check the files of the city, and she basically said, yeah, you know what? This is a 6-unit.
Wow.
Reason being that this building was at one point a boarding house, and there was some obscure city record that actually said it was a 6-unit. So that was my time to take another bite of the apple, and I got plans and permits in place to add another 2 units to an already lucrative deal. And so I spent another $150,000 per unit to add 2 additional units that in the Lakeview market are worth approximately $300,000 a unit. So by spending $300,000, I was able to increase the incremental value of the building by $600,000.
Right.
And in summary, I was able to get the building reappraised for around $2 million with an all-in basis of around $1.1 million, $1.150
Wow.
and put a loan on that particular asset, at like $1.35 million, $1.4 million.
Wow.
And this is again after having already refinanced it multiple times. And so it's just sort of funny. I look at starting out, and I look at advice I give to young people. And the biggest piece of advice I would give is to be patient and find a really good deal for the first one. And if you find something you like, beg, borrow, steal, put as much of your own resources in it as you can, because if it's successful, you're going to want to enjoy the fruits of that.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, on this building, I had the opportunity to bring in a partner, and I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because it was like an 11% unlevered return. And these are, as you know, very hard to find. And so now going forward, doing bigger projects, it's not always practical just to use your own resources. But it was funny that literally one building allowed me to replicate my whole corporate salary.
Yeah.
And then some. And that was when I really felt truly comfortable leaving my corporate job. But again, this was all sort of a funny nights and weekend thing for me.
Yeah, it's fun. It's crazy hearing this, because then as you're describing this third deal, I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, Wells Fargo was, we're done with this at that point. Once this first appraisal happened, not this thing in 2015 with the 2 units, but once this first deal hits, and now this is worth $1.3 million, I'm in for $750. Wells Fargo, we're done with this.
That would be half a decade of work at Wells Fargo, and I did it nights and weekends on one good project.
Right. Then at that point, you're thinking, wow, what if I could do like one of these a year?
Oh yeah, well, that's the funny thing is you don't have to do 10 deals in a year. You focus on doing one good one and keep yourself busy, and that's a funny thing as I've progressed in my own career, is that a lot of it is just about finding the satisfaction of doing the projects. It becomes less about money, financial resources, just having a big portfolio, and a lot more about having the fun of the chase,
right?
Mentorship, helping other people, finding a little bit, of altruism to give back a little bit. And that's one of the reasons I love helping mentor young people and getting them in the business, and helping my friends find and buy their first building and set them up with the lender and the contractor and all the resources. Cause it's actually just as fun to see other people do it as to do your first deals. And I get that same joy in helping young people.
Really cool. I know that. I agree with that. I'm getting more enjoyment at this point, seeing other people, like either on the team or someone, get equity, or it's happy to, it's same here. And then what's interesting too, I really feel like those first deals, it's almost like that was the most fun. Like they don't realize what's going on in a way like this. I mean, you can speak for yourself, but almost maybe seeing that first deal happen where, wait a second, this is going to appraise for this much more. And we, you're not sure how it's going to pan out. You're doing this light rehab on your own, where you're painting the units, and you're the contractor, not sure where this is headed. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, this is worth,
it worked
10% more. Okay.
It actually worked. And you sort of have to pinch yourself. It's funny. I'll never forget. I had a Wells Fargo client, and sadly I met him right before he found out he was terminally ill, but he was a very prominent and local multifamily investor who I we both took a real shining to each other because he saw what I was doing nights and weekends, and he he really was kind of impressed that I was a guy like him when he was younger, with the gumption to basically say, you know what, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to just start dabbling. What's the worst that can happen? I'm going to accept that not everything will work and get comfortable with the possibility that I could fail. Because if you don't try, you'll never know. But that was one thing he said to me, was that I wish I could go back to the early days because that was the most fun. And this was a guy who ended up owning 1,500 units locally with no partners or investors, a very prominent local guy.
Wow.
So that definitely sticks, and that's something that's been exciting for me starting this new development company, is feeling like I'm starting my own career for the second time.
Yeah.
And just finding the excitement and energy of working with young people that I'm helping mentor and train to find their own way. So that's something that's been really quite enjoyable.
Yeah, let's maybe talk about what was going through your mind more so when you had then left Wells Fargo. So you had 3 deals when you quit, or where were you at?
So yeah, it's kind of funny. I had acquired a couple of 4-unit buildings in Lakeview, one in Lincoln Park, and one of them being a total home run that really gave me comfort to leave, that I had now sort of a little bit of a cushion. But then it was funny. I actually, through total happenstance, connected with a guy who became my first outside investor. And it turns out he was a neighbor, and he was also worked with one of my business partners. And it was sort of interesting. This guy was an amazing guy and is still a good friend to this date, and we still own a portfolio together. But I had found a 6-unit building. Sort of funny, at the time, it was $450,000 in Bucktown.
Yep.
And this was when the world was really bad, and I was still at the bank. And I put together a basic financial model, and I said, hey, this is this deal. We need a whopping $200,000 of equity. I don't have it. You might. And why don't we come up with a structure where you can help us get off the ground, sign a note, and be the controlling partner and the investor, and we can have this really complicated structure. To which he said, okay, here's what I want. I don't want all these elaborate hurdles. I want an easy, clean deal. I want to have some level of control. I'm willing to sign the note, but this is yours to run with. Show me what you got. And so that was really when Campbell Street, my predecessor company, was formed, by buying our first buildings on Campbell Avenue. And we subsequently bought probably, another $7-8 million of buildings in that area.
Yeah.
And it was funny. I think that was May 31st of 2013. I left the bank July of 2013. I'll never forget that day. It was a very joyful day.
Yeah.
There was a lot of jumping in the air and fist bumping.
That's exciting.
This. But anyways, it was funny because I had acquired a portfolio with the same investor just 6 months after acquiring the first gut renovation project. And it actually was published in the Illinois Real Estate Journal, and it came into my Wells Fargo inbox. And so I was like, you know what, it's time.
Yeah.
And I saw a very clear path, and I had great partner to work with on growing Campbell Street, and that was just an amazing time of my career.
Yeah.
And it was really at that point that I felt like it was just okay just to walk away. And banking was great, but a lot of it was, it was kind of wearing on me. And I just knew in the back of my head that there's more out there, and I can pursue the same avenue as a number of my Wells Fargo clients. It's funny. Actually, I just got looked up by one of my favorite Wells Fargo clients last week. It's a group of guys out of Evanston that turn over big multifamily deals, and they found me online. And these guys were real mentors to me while I was at banking, and they just kept saying, Gabe, one day, just keep doing your thing. And they were always willing to help me and talk to me. And I'd financed a couple of their projects. And so it was sort of funny how that worked out.
Yeah.
But they were, my point of this actually was they started their career in banking. A lot of people that don't get stuck in banking end up going off and being the borrower.
Right.
And even is really cool. I'll never forget my boss, my first boss at Wells Fargo, was a great lady. She basically said, one day you'll be a borrower. And there was a lot of people around me that kind of believed in me. And they didn't take issue with me being an entrepreneur on the side, because I worked hard. I got my job done. I was just generally a good employee, minus the occasional nap under my desk. But it was really a great place to start. And so it was really getting to this critical mass and seeing a future and a pipeline and a vision to, grow to the next step that I felt 100% comfortable leaving the bank.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
so.
oh yeah. If you had more there, go for it. Otherwise, I was going to ask a
No, and I would just say, and
mindset
this
thing.
was 2013, and the world was starting to stabilize, and it was pretty obvious that we were on the mend and rebounding. So
Yeah, because a big takeaway I have from hearing your story, and it kind of parallels mine in terms of like, I had a job as well, and I quit when I had 5 buildings, and so
yeah,
actually I had five as that with my Blackhawk partners, and then I guess I had two on my own. So anyways. Point being, like one thing that I noticed people doing where they need to have like their whole life planned out to quit their job and know every move,
yeah,
or they try to do something super complicated where, all right, I'm going to quit and then I'm going to do this development deal. That's the first deal. And so we both kind of end up doing the same thing, where we got, 4 or so properties under our belt. We own them. We're making money off them. We did it nights and weekends. I mean, those years, I'm sure it's the same. It's the same for you because of the
yeah.
college football thing. Yeah, that's all I did on most nights and weekends was work on these deals. But then, 3 years go by doing that, and you're quitting your job, and you have something that you're already doing. It wasn't like, all right, it's going to be a cold start.
Yeah.
I'll quit, and then I'll go on LinkedIn, and it'll say like to be like coming soon for 4 months. Like it'll be, it's already happening. Like so that I think was a big thing we both did to be able to quit our jobs.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And that's the thing. It's just people that work in finance get sucked in, and it gets really cushy. And a lot of people in non-entrepreneurial jobs, they wake up and they're in their mid-30s and they're making great money and they got a great life. But the second they leave that job, the income stops. Right. And so that's what's sort of interesting about real estate, as you know, is that the goal is to just build a big enough of a portfolio that the income is coming in when you're sleeping, when you're waking up, when you're brushing your teeth. And just getting really to that critical mass where you can then set some of your personal goals for either future growth or, other things that are important, giving back, for instance, and just finding what's that right comfort point. So yeah, it's really interesting thinking of it that way.
Yeah, and I'm sure whatever goals you had at the time, I mean, it's crazy to think like you blew through them all.
Yeah, that's safe to say.
I mean, because the same has happened with me where, I mean, in Wisconsin, I heard about somebody who sold a $100 million portfolio. It was like the biggest deal ever, basically, when I was in high school. Steve Brown, he sold the private dorms. That was the deal. But that was, that's like a unimaginable amount of money.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think both of us have like bought that and own it. Like it's just where I would have never thought, this buying this first duplex, here's where I'm at, or when you bought the 4-unit, here's where we are.
Well, today. Right. And it's sometimes hard to know where you'll be and where you can go and what the potential is. And, it's funny when I think about things that give me stress in my life. Actually, a really good friend of mine said this to me. He's like, have 22-year-old Gabe ask 37-year-old Gabe what you're stressed out about, and see what 22-year-old Gabe says about what 37-year-old Gabe is worrying about. And, take a little bit of stock in how much fun you've had and how good you feel about your career and the things you've done. And it's not all easy, as you know, and that's what's really cool. I mean, you and I grew up basically in the town next to each other. We're from small towns, and, we just worked hard and, have that Midwest work ethic. And, I think a lot of it too comes down to doing what you enjoy and working with people you really like. And while, I will say I love the people I worked with at the bank. Anytime you are in a big corporate setting, I know other people, not necessarily me, struggle with, sometimes you really can't choose who you're working with. And so as you go down this path, not only potentially having this financial freedom, but also having the freedom of choice of what you do, when you work, who you work with is really a pretty incredible thing. So
yeah, and one thing that I think would be interesting, where I know this was the experience having lived a similar thing, but yeah, Wells Fargo, we're part of a big system here. It's not up to you if this loan's happening. Whereas you walk over to your deal in East Lakeview, you're calling all the shots. It's like totally
you're running
crazy.
It's funny, actually. Another good friend and investor and mentor of mine said this to me. He's like, I never had heard this before, but he actually flew me down to his alma mater in downstate Illinois, and I actually gave a speech to an entrepreneur class, actually a program that he was responsible for founding. And one thing he explained to the students that I really hadn't considered until that time is that every building you buy is its own business.
Yeah.
It's its own
Okay.
P&L. It's got its own members. It's got its own shareholders. And you can either be the sole shareholder or you can find other shareholders and
Interesting.
fund it in different ways. And those shareholders can be bought out. But every building, be it a house,
Yeah.
be it a 20 unit, a 100 unit, a 500 unit complex, it's its own business. And it's got its own issues, its own P&L. And you just need to drive the bottom line in order to make it successful.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear how he described that. I mean, that's definitely true. Every deal is its own company. I open up a different
it really
LLC
is.
for every deal, different loan, different stuff on each one. What about, I think let's circle back. So that first deal you had raised money on, what I heard that was interesting, and I had a similar experience where, right, I went to somebody and I explained kind of what we did at the big company I worked at. Like, this is a preferred return, then it'll be like a multiple tier waterfall, and so then after a certain IRR we'll be doing this and this and this, and it was, I'm explaining it to a guy who's very smart, but he's not in like finance. So then he's same response you had. Well, let's just pick a number to split on, like not just like a straight up split. And then that way too, it's interesting. You do that, you're more aligned. Like now it's not a problem if like he wanted to keep the building and you're going, wait, I'm my preferred return diluting my interest. Like it's not like
100%.
So that's interesting. You had the same experience, because one thing too that I'd say, it's just kind of, there's a playbook kind of for this, but you can just figure out what works for you and your partner or investor.
100%.
And then there's no one way to do it. And we've kind of both ended up in unique situations where that's what we've done on a lot of deals. But it's, for me, and it sounds like for you, that was our investor actually driving that. Like, why make this super complicated thing that is going to force us to sell in 3 years, where we could just own it at some percentage we think is fair. You get a little extra for doing the work, and then we'll just keep it.
Absolutely.
Do these refis.
No, and I wholeheartedly agree
Yeah.
with that. And I think really the key is you start wanting to bring in outside money, which is, unless you're independently wealthy, let's face it, you have to bring in outside money unless you're just hitting home runs. And those are very hard to do. You can't really pick the market, the timing on that. But I think the key is just demonstrating value and demonstrating trust, so that people know that if they are giving you their resources that they've worked hard to earn, that those resources are safe because you're a fiduciary of their capital. And so that's really the interesting thing, is that as people get more skilled in this business, it stops being about doing deals and being a developer and being the most creative guy. You actually start becoming a money manager.
Yeah.
And you're almost like a bond manager. You're managing yield and income. And so it's really interesting. And that's why, I mean, as I even scale to bigger size projects, I still like doing smaller deals because they're fun and it's cool to get your hands dirty and get in the trench.
For sure. And then too, if you're able to do that with your own money primarily too, like then that's such a simpler execution.
It is. Yeah.
Some of my favorite deals are those ones too, where it was just, I bought a 6 unit, turned it into a 7 unit, the killer deal. It wasn't much more to it, but I just was only decision maker. It was very fast. Rewarding. You just walk in there, decide, done. Don't need to talk to anybody. Yeah, that was great. Well, yeah, let's keep talking about deals then. I guess where were you learning then? So you were doing these deals. Obviously, you learned a lot at Wells Fargo. But then where else you had a mentor in Madison? You were still talking to him?
That's a really great question. Basically, we just bought our first building, my college friend and I, and just threw ourselves into the fire. But actually, it's funny looking back. I think it must have been 08, 09, around that time. You and I had started talking then, and we initially met at a networking function, and it might have even been while you were still in school. But I asked you how you were doing it and saw like a really great model for like how to actually replicate this and go off and do this. And it was like, wow, that sounds actually pretty straightforward. And so that's a funny thing. As I talk to people about getting in this business, find people that are doing what you want to do and ask them a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And so at the time I asked you, I was blown away by what you had done by that point of your career. I said, how are you structuring it? How easy is this? This sounds almost too good to be true. And it was true. And so it's funny, as I've helped some of my friends get their first loan, buy their first building, I basically said, here's how I did it. Here's a deal. Here's my pro forma on the deal. This is how it works. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
You're going to buy it for this. You're going to put this in. These are the assumptions. And we're going to be in at this cost. You're going to be done and it's going to be worth this. And this is going to be your cash flow. So just demonstrating to people how it works. And as I might have mentioned earlier, I also had a lot of people, Wells Fargo clients who had done it. And then my friend and mentor in Madison, where it was not as technical, but I saw what he was doing and how he managed a business, and just found people that I could go to and ask a lot of questions. And I still, to this day, even as I'm doing bigger projects and more sophisticated fundraising, I like going to other people and asking them about their best practices, because that's a great way for self-improvement.
Yeah, and that's really what I've done too. I mean, happy to have helped in any way, but I do the same thing. I had a mentor through ULI that I got connected to. I learned a ton from, and still talk to him. And same thing. I see people doing stuff. I'm asking tons of questions, or even actually just observing what's going on. Like where you can kind of see how people are doing things. And that's part of the reason I started the podcast. Like I see people where they're getting more deal flow, more passive investors, more LPs coming into their deals, and that's because you're like out there now. It's not like a secret.
You're absolutely right.
So then it's the same thing. I didn't go to like a real estate boot camp or for a weekend, and I know you didn't either, where it was some course off an infomercial or something. It wasn't that. It was we just started doing it, and then observe and ask questions from people.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, that, and then just, I guess, what both gotta think critically along the way and make decisions. That's the secret, maybe. But then let's circle back to some deals. You had mentioned an office deal that you bought. Obviously, I know the deal, but so West Loop neighborhood, Chicago, hottest neighborhood, basically last 10 years almost. So when we hear about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little bit of a right place, right time situation, but this now goes back to 2014. One of our previous partners in my prior company was in control of a busted office deal in West Loop, and basically needed someone to come in and do the turnaround. And so this was actually a really funny way at the time, as I started my career and launched Campbell Street in 2012, 2013 to get started, was we would basically find some of these opportunities where we could take over turnaround assets, including some multifamily on the north side of Chicago, and then this office project in Fulton Market, which, to high level, we'd acquired a note with a basis of around $35 a foot. Wow. And in the last 24 months, we were able to sell it somewhere in the mid $200 a foot range. And so now we had to put money in, and it was 5 or 6 years of real work and sweat equity without making anything.
Yeah.
But it was just, having other stuff going and the ability to just kind of hang in there and stay the course. And actually through that same relationship, we had taken over a 19-unit building in Rogers Park that we assigned an arbitrary value because this partner had a mezz loan that foreclosed on it of $1.3 million, and we had used some additional resources from him and put around $400,000 in that asset. So we were all in it somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.7 million, $1.8 million, and then actually we're able to exit that north of $3 million. Nice. With, I think, we had zero down on that. So it's sort of interesting.
In both those deals, those were properties that the lender got back on these mezz loans, and then you were able to take them from someone throwing the keys back to them at a $1.3 million loan.
Yeah, exactly.
And then pushing the value to over 3.
Yeah, that's correct. And what's funny, I look back at that time, and I'm finding myself in a similar situation where people that have these opportunities sometimes don't have the young, hungry person with the vigor that is willing to, bust their butt to make it happen and manage the turnaround. So kind of a little bit of the right place, right time, but it really shown to me that you can actually do deals without having any real money down, maybe without even having recourse.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting, just the different opportunities that can come up, and you just got to keep your eyes open and look for value.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a great find, great relationship then, where the guy's bringing the deal and willing to invest in it. So like you said, I mean, that I know the person, he's older and doesn't want to be the one doing the rehab anymore.
Yeah.
He could have his money work for him, and then it's a great pairing.
Well, and again, it's just about demonstrating value in your ability to execute and going into maybe a rough neighborhood and having comfort in that and dealing with some really hard situations, some bad tenants, city issues, and just saying, all right, what doesn't kill me, makes me stronger. Yeah. Basically. So.
Yeah. And let's bring it more to the present then. So I know you got a new deal trying to not make this so specific to Chicago, but it's on on Ashland, and what neighborhood would you say that's in?
Yeah, for
Roscoe.
marketing, I like to call it Southport Corridor.
Okay.
It is essentially Southport Corridor. It's a few blocks west of Southport Avenue. So yeah, I'm very excited. I actually am doing one of the biggest deals of my career. Arguably one of the scariest because it is a pretty ambitious ground up development. It's a 48 unit new construction in basically the Southport Corridor, Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago. And yeah, I just acquired the land in the last couple of weeks. It's fully entitled, just waiting on my permits. And so that's been a really interesting experience because never in my career have I ever taken out a land loan without knowing that I'm immediately going to go vertical. So I have done some new construction projects, but never anywhere near this size or magnitude. And it was always, not only smaller, but it was more imminently converting to construction.
Yeah, because prior to this, the biggest deal you had, let's say, built, was it the 19 unit?
It was about a $7 million project. It was a new construction up in Wilmette. That was
Nice.
14 units in medical office and underground structured parking.
I know the one, but we go from that to then what's the Ashland deal size?
That's 48
units. Yeah,
and then actually,
that's a big jump.
Yeah, we did another one that was interesting. We bought a building at 1911 West Irving Park Road, and it was a really rundown building. It was 6 units and really derelict commercial, but what we liked most about this particular deal was it had a massive empty yard in the back. And actually, through our work at Fulton, we had built a relationship with a medical tenant who runs a very successful business, and they actually specifically wanted to be in North Center. So this site came on the market. We were able to negotiate a lease with them for a 10-year, 7,500 square foot space. And then I can't believe I did this. We acquired the property without even having the zoning in place, which is very, very, very risky, and frankly, probably wouldn't do that again.
What did you need it zoned for? It was zoned. It was just zoned as a
so it was a
residential?
-2 zoning. But what made the project work was the ability to expand the building. So again, we bought on a 100-foot wide, 125-foot deep lot. We basically bought this building that had 4 rundown retail spaces, and then it had 6 apartments above it. And so our vision for the property was to actually take the front 6 apartments, make them into 8, and then expand the building from being around 10,000 square feet to about 27,000 square feet. So we basically made an elevator corridor, hallway and an elevator corridor to the back, and then built a 16-unit addition. So that required a zoning change that allowed us to take advantage of Chicago's transit-oriented development ordinance. So that was the first of that kind.
Yeah.
So definitely a smaller scale than this Ashland project.
Yeah, but that's a complicated deal where you didn't have the zoning in place, and then it's on top of that brown line stop, but that's, at that point there were TOD deals happening, but not.
Yeah, it wasn't
like
a
what was
layout.
coming. Yeah,
and it was funny because even at the very end, our construction lender came through. He's a great guy. He's done 30 plus projects for myself and my group. He came through and he's like, I didn't really understand what you were actually doing until it was done.
What?
But
I guess that'll happen on the 10th deal or whatever.
Yeah,
Not on the first one.
But at the time, everything went wrong. It was not a perfect deal by any stretch. There were unforeseen costs. The retail space delivered late, a lot of uncomfortable conversations. And in the midst of it, I was not sleeping at night, and it was a really stressful time. And I looked at it and I said, God, why did I do this? And now 4 or 5 years later, the tenant's still there. They've expanded into adjacent space. And I'm thinking, you know what? I don't even remember how miserable I was at the time. It all sort of worked out. In fact, I'm closing a refinance tomorrow to drop my rate by 30% and taking some money out. So long term, great project, but in the moment, it was challenging. So
yeah, I'm sure the numbers on it were great. If you can build 16 or 18 units on what was essentially free land in the back that came with it.
More or less. Yeah.
That's not too
bad. But it was just an example of thinking about things creatively and doing things differently. So.
Yeah, because one thing that I've noticed on your rehabs, like you have like a much higher end design, where even for stuff I've rehabbed, I'm sort of just, I feel like I'm going higher end, but it's still like I'm not trying too hard. Like I'm trying to get the rents where I need them and move on. You've done some really, really cool projects. So let's talk about how you're thinking about design and higher end rehab. So how do you approach that?
So it's interesting. I've remodeled maybe, over 350, 400 units in my career. And I started out always hiring a third-party contractor. And then after having a lot of bad experiences with some contractors, I had an epiphany where I said, I'm going to figure out and do it for myself.
Yeah.
This will be fun. And it was great because it taught me a lot about construction, but it also made me realize this is not the highest and best use for my time and resources. But what I tried to do really starting in the last 3 years was create more of a brand so that the buildings I had renovated were recognizable, they were unique, they were different, because there's, as you know, a lot of competition in multifamily. There's a lot of cookie cutter stuff out there. And even as I'm doing some gut renovations now, and I talk to the guys doing the work, on the margin, spending more on nice finishes does not cost that much more.
Right.
Spending 120 on a light fixture versus 80, or getting a slightly nicer tile for $3 versus $1.50. I mean, the labor is all the same. And in doing so, I've been able to capture, the really high end of the market, in some cases set record rents. And at the time, be able to revalue those properties at higher appraised values, or create an asset that's more appealing to a buyer that might be someone looking for more of an armchair investment. But
Yeah.
I've sold one of these buildings I sold at a number I can't rationalize. It was a smaller walk-up deal that traded for basically a 5 cap.
Wow.
Because
Like a 5.0.
5.0.
Wow.
Small building, Bucktown. But the guy that came in had looked at 20 walk-ups and said, I've never seen anything like this. I want this. And there's more to investing than just money and returns. There's this certain element of, I think, just enjoyment and prestige from some investors buying a building that's just because it's cool. Not everything is about money. A large part of it is about money and returns, but people want to own cool looking buildings with nice finishes. And I found that you can usually get a bigger return from someone that looks at something as being unique and
that's interesting.
Sort of its own brand, it's just different. And it's allowed me to have a little more creativity and just mix things up a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's fun. That also too, there's a lot of people where they're not analytical first, might be more of an emotional decision maker. So if that's your tenant, they'll pay up big for having the coolest unit they've ever seen, or that guy or group that bought the property paid up, big for buying at a 5.0 cap. But it sounds like it's his money. He can do what he wants, and it's a cool building.
Absolutely.
He wanted it.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. How are you going to approach the Ashland development deal then? Is that's going to be, how high end are you going with that?
Yeah. So that's a great question. It's exciting because it's my first project that I would describe as being mass produced. And so I've been spending a lot of time on value engineering, design, finishes. I have a wonderful team. It's run by a really good friend of mine who does a lot of the design work on my existing portfolio, my past deals. And so we're trying to come up with a really creative branding and marketing program, and then just put something out that's different, but not over the top such that we compromise our construction budget. And that's really actually one of the exciting things about Base 3 development, is doing projects that are larger in scale, gearing more towards institutional, and creating a brand and a following and something that's just unique, special, and beautiful. And so with Base 3, I mean, the idea starting with Ashland is to incorporate, technology in the future of residential living. Things integrating to your phone, smart locks, perhaps Sonos in units, and things that don't cost a lot, but they give it that little extra edge, and it shows that you're early adapting to the future of multifamily urban living.
You have some technology specifically picked out at this point, or what?
We're going through some of the paces on exploring those options, but smart locks are one thing that come to mind. And so we're looking at the different options for, the future of real estate is this little mini computer we have in our pocket called the iPhone or the Android.
Have you done a demo on the latch locks?
I have not.
That I think is the coolest. Some people who quit either Apple or Google started it, and it's a smart lock, and it's controlled completely from your phone, but doesn't need to be on Wi-Fi. And so how it works, let's say if you wanted to change the lock, you need to lock someone out. You can do it from your computer, and actually what it does is the app on the person you're locking out on their phone, when they get to the lock, it then makes the change when it touches the phone. So then the app would tell it, I need to lock this phone out.
Wow.
And so what's cool about it is it's no Wi-Fi. So you don't have to worry about your building being on Wi-Fi. Yeah. Or even whatever the near field thing. I'm not sure what the technology is, but it's so that if I was doing ground up, I'd give that a look. On a retrofit, it's too much where those are installed. I think it was like $300 a lock.
Uh-huh.
So if you're doing, let's say a deal where there's two locks on, front and back door, where this is probably just one door because it's going to be a corridor.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Then and you already got to put a lock in, so then it's, again, to your point, it's just not that big of a jump marginally.
Yeah.
So that I'd give that a look. We have a Butterfly MX intercom on
We've started
one of our deals that I've
into some of our
really,
properties.
really liked that. And I haven't had any issues with it, but that's only on an 8 unit. But it just already was installed on the building I bought.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I would check out Latch. And I mean, what we did on our other deals were just a more basic schlag keypad one, but that's not actually a smart lock. That's just a lock with the keypad.
Yeah, but it's nice. People don't want to have to grab keys when they're going out.
Yeah, but that's just kind of like an intermediary lock. I feel like that's $200. Where if you're going to be the new cool building in Southport Quarter, then you go for the Latch and have the leasing agent unlock it with their phone every time.
Yeah,
that'd be good. Yes, do real estate.
Yeah.
So the nice. Well, yeah, let's think about, I mean, what else? I mean, I think it's really interesting how you learned from Wells Fargo to specialize. That's something that I heard that we didn't really specifically identify, but you've done that too. I mean, you've dipped into doing the office deal and a few other things, but really it's specialized in multifamily value add. So that it's interesting to hear the whole story, because then, I think it's, you see a deal that comes up, maybe it's the Ashland development deal, whatever it is, you can tell if it's a good deal or not so much quicker, because you're not also doing like office deals in the suburbs or building hotels or other totally different stuff that's taking you away, where you can tell really fast, if a deal's going to be good, and then you have everything to execute it now because that's all you're doing.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the interesting thing about real estate, is that when I was about to buy my first building in 2008, nothing looked good because the market was hot.
Yeah.
And that could just be a sign that it's not a good time to buy or invest, but people like ourselves like to transact. And what we're seeing is that yields are falling because people need a place to put money, but we're also looking at inflation and other factors that make real estate a continued good investment. And so it's interesting. I mean, when I look back at when I started my career, I wouldn't do anything unless I was making an 8% unlevered return. And now the norm, depending on the size of the project, is a little over 6.
Yeah.
And we've talked a good deal about this offline, that the market in the Southeast and the Southwest is like a 4.
Yeah, you're talking about unlevered.
Yeah,
unlevered.
I'm sorry, unlevered return. Yeah. So
but unlevered yield on cost, right?
Yeah,
Not
I'm sorry.
unlevered
Yes,
IRR.
unlevered yield on cost. Correct. Like cap rate, like basically NOI over your project cost.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. Just and that's another trend I see as I'm looking at buying and renovating other buildings and comparing it to building a new elevator building, where you might be able to build a new elevator building with land if you buy the land right for $275,000 to $300,000 a unit. I mean, right now, buying a gut renovation project, you're lucky to buy in good areas for $200,000 a door.
Great. Well, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, why don't we dive into raising capital next? I think we touched on it before, but then the first deal you raised money on was that one on Campbell, or?
Yeah, it was the Campbell Street project with a single individual who became a repeat investor.
Nice. And so on that first deal, what was sort of going through your mind? What was the initial pitch? What was the structure? Run us through that.
Well, it was funny. I had only done 3 other smaller deals at the time, just these little 4-unit walk-up projects on the north side of Chicago. And so I had something I could show as a clear case study, but it was not my finest presentation. I had an Excel spreadsheet and a picture of the building on a Word doc.
Yeah.
Basically stating, like, this is the general concept. Here's how it worked here. I think we can replicate this in the same opportunity. And so it was funny, in my mind, I had this idea that when you went out to raise money, you have to have this very complicated structure with waterfalls, preferred returns, fees, et cetera, et cetera. And so on this first project, we weren't looking to raise all the money in the world. It was about $225,000. It was a building that was only $450,000, 6-unit in Bucktown, if you can believe it. That's
what
it needed. A lot of work, needless to say. I mean, it was basically a shell, but it's crazy to look back that that's what the world was like. And the area is, of course, now totally different. But on this particular project, we went to our investor with this structure of something more traditional, like a 90-10 and splits, et cetera, et cetera. And his simple response, and this is a guy that worked on Wall Street and now runs a multi-billion-dollar family office based out of New York. Really impressive guy. He basically said, let's do something really simple. I'm going to help you sign your first note and get you guys off the ground. And I'm going to put up the lion's share of the capital. but I want you guys to put in a little more money. Let's keep it super simple. Let's not overcomplicate this. I want to have a very clear, transparent way of getting this done. Align our interests, align you guys as managers, and look at this as a long-term investment. And keep it simple. And I just about fell out of my chair when I heard that. And then we subsequently went on to buy 5 other buildings in a very clean, simple structure that was super fair. And out of those buildings, I mean, now literally almost 10 years later, we've refinance most of them to over 125% loan to cost and made our investor whole, and he's super happy.
Nice.
And it all just worked out. So I was surprised that just keeping it simple was really the way to go.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience where I worked at 2 shops prior where they would have had a multi-tiered waterfall. So okay, once you're at a 8, this happens. Once you get to 12 IRR, 15. Whereas super complicated. So I thought, let's do the same thing when I raise money. And I was talking to someone who's very smart and ran a real successful business, kind of like what you're talking about. But the same deal. It's like, that's so complicated. Why wouldn't we just do something as straight up split, and then there's not any incentive where you need to sell the property or something just to get your incentive fee? So I had a similar experience. I mean, that was a big takeaway for me. It sounds like for you, where for anybody kind of listening, it's you can, it's up to just whatever you and your partner want to do, you and your investor, where there's
no right answer. There's no one size fits all. And as long as you can demonstrate value and you can demonstrate trust, confidence that you can be a good fiduciary of someone's money, then it is available. And you can, in many cases, dictate the terms.
Yeah. And then you set up a structure that worked for all of you, where it doesn't matter if what these other people are doing this kind of structure. This worked better for you guys. And it was a huge success because the way you're talking about, you still own the buildings now. So then having a simple structure, it allowed you to keep a lot of those buildings too. And you guys have made 100%. More money by keeping your chips on the table, so to speak. So everyone won with that idea of being simple.
Yes,
for sure.
Spot on.
Well, nice. Cool. I mean, I think that's kind of everything I wanted to touch on. I think let's just wrap it there. Great job, Gabe.
Yeah, thank you. And again, it's really an honor to be here, and I love to continue the conversation. And it's always, when you asked about, how to get ideas and, mentorship, and it's actually pretty cool. You and I are very similar, but you're someone I really respect and admire, and you've always been a great sounding board. And that's something I would say to people listening that are getting in the business. Find people you respect, admire, you look up to, ask them a lot of questions. And I've been told that you're usually the average of the 5 people you're around most. And if you're around really smart, dynamic people, they tend to rub off on you. So, I've really followed a lot out of your playbook, and I, again, really honored to be here. Thanks for having me as your guest.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I've learned plenty from you about construction and different things and lending. So can't wait to be on your podcast soon. So I'm just kidding. So how can listeners get in touch with you?
I think one of the best ways to get in touch with me would be to look me up on LinkedIn. So it's Gabe Horstick. And then you can also drop me an email at gabe@base3co.com, spelled out BASE, the number 3, then co.com. So thanks again for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I appreciate having you on. I mean, I think this is a great episode. A lot of great takeaways. I mean, for me, one thing we both kind of did was just keep it simple and then get started. I mean, so that's my biggest takeaway from this. So appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
So awesome. Well, until next time, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
If you learned something from today's show, leave a review and hit that subscribe button wherever you enjoy your podcast. Dive deeper into real estate investing on Brenneman Capital's website, brenneman.com, where we have numerous free resources and information that can help both active and passive real estate investors. Accredited investors can get started today as a passive investor in our multifamily investment opportunities by hitting the Invest Now button on our website.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Drew Brenneman and guests as of the date of recording and do not purport to reflect the views or opinions of Brenneman Capital LLC and its subsidiaries. Views and opinions are provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon or deemed as investment or tax advice or an offer to buy or sell securities. The speaker cannot be held responsible for any direct or incidental loss incurred by applying any of the information offered.